Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome. This is On the Path. On the Path. Um, actually, On the Path was one of the first shows I did, and I continue to do it. So it's really about being in pursuit of Druidic theosophy and understanding the relationship between the Druids and their gods, and knowing how we could take that and apply that today in our relationship with our god or gods, our pantheon or pantheons. And I truly do this to teach you what I've learned this week. And remember, everything I teach is, everything I teach is definitely is a good combination between research and, as many would say, I guess, the Akashic Records. So, welcome everyone. I come to you as Druid Niklas Deklan, not as some arch-druid of druids or some Merlin of Merlin or wizard of wizards, some gurus or magi of magus. Just come to you simply as one who is on the path. So I hope you enjoy this. Tonight we're going to talk about the idea of what the foundations of Druidic faith would have been, what faith the Druids had with the gods. And knowing that, we will be able to see more clearly how we can have a stronger, deeper, and more meaningful faith between that and what our greatest connection is. So let's begin. We start with the Druid's prayer. So that I ground myself in the presence of the kindred, what our deities, our mysticals, and our ancestors. In the most holy sign of the cross, north to south and from the east to the west, a perfect offering is made. May we have ye honor to be wisdom to divine, and from divining knowing, and from knowing to studying, and from studying to understanding, and from understanding to applying, and from applying to creating, and from creating to gauging, and from gauging to helping, and from helping to teaching, and from teaching to healing, from healing to allowing, and from allowing to freeing. Grant, O kindred, ye protection, and in ye protection ye strength, and in ye strength ye understanding, and in ye understanding ye knowledge, and in ye knowledge of justice. Justice frees Druidic balance from the physical law of heart and earth, from the cosmic law of soul and water, from the brand law of mind and wind, from the universal law of spirit and fire. There creates my Druidic tetrachonomy. Within the limits of the Druidic tetrachonomy livest my great law of four. Within the limits of the great law of four livest my excellence, and within the limits of excellence livest my perseverance. And in the peace of perseverance, the love of it, and in the love of it, the love of ourselves, And in the love of ourselves, the law of all existences, and in the love of all existences, the love you give us as mortals. Ye whom are from source, ye whom are with force, ye whom are of course, ye whom are endorse, without absence, and so, in and within all goodness, in and within all fullness, in and within all creation, in and within all realms, in and within all Gwynfyd, and so without nothing, I'm on the path, Girawen. Thanks for joining, everyone, and I guess we'll start. I want to grab a book real fast because I'm going to be reading out of it, and I forgot to bring it, so give me 1 second. It's right around the corner. Oh, sorry about that. And we're going to learn tonight a little bit about the foundation of Druidic faith. And our objectives are going to be to identify, theorize, and practice this Druidic faith. Differentiate, I wrote, between faith and belief. Understanding the difference between the Celtic free will and comparing that with a Druidic determination. And understanding the Beresford McCullough argument, and finally synthesizing temporal dynamics with faith. So I think it's going to be a great night. I hope you stay with me. Alright, so before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of belief versus faith. And to understand that belief comes from something we call an infinitive. Okay? It's infinite. Alright? To believe. And any infinitive is infinite because there's no constraints of time upon it. Whereas faith, on the other hand, okay, is a possessive infinitive. What do I mean by this? I mean that in the infinitive to believe, in the infinitive, it creates this infinitive of to believe. But with faith, the noun, you can't say I faith, you faith, he faiths, she faiths. You must use the split and the possessive have to acquire it. So you acquire it by saying I have faith, not necessarily I faith. You must have it. You must possess it. And I think that that is really a very important observation that I think it's, good if we, understand that. Because that's going to start this journey as I take you deeper and deeper into this idea of Druidic faith and what that Druidic faith was. In many cases, when we believe or to believe, we hold certain. Whereas when we have faith, we are certain. And holding certain is believing, while being certain is having faith. What's the difference? The difference is that in believing, we desire. We are able to desire, but in having faith, we trust. We have trust. And that is the very difference between both believing and having faith. Now, I think it's interesting in this I guess discovery that we made in Caesar's definition of naming these group of priests Druids. And while I'll disagree with many that we should take the Gaelic definition, I still think we should use the Latin, since it was the Latin name given to them. I speak to you about the idea of Deru and Ovid, and that, or weed, okay? The idea is that the Deru of it, the Deru part of that word is faith itself. It comes from a word bet, as in bet shegobra, which means Deru. And it's similar to a wide road. Now, on the other hand, Ovid, or weed, is belief, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European le, which is vid, which is similar to a road trip versus a wide road. And funny enough, if you take both the wide road and the road trip and put them together, the Druids saw faith as a journey. And I find that that is very interesting, that the Druids would find that faith is a journey, okay, to which there is destination. And I want you to think about that as you think about faith on a little bit more deeper idea. Which brings us to the Ellis and McCullough argument on will. Before we touch on that, and before I read you a section on what we're going to discover, understand that faith, unlike belief, must be activated by possession of it. For example, that's why we say to have faith and not necessarily to faith. You can't faith anything. You can possess it. And you need the word have to activate it, you see? And to activate that possession, you need to have that faith. So faith needs will, or in essence, determination. You must have the determination or will to have faith. Belief, on the other hand, does not have any such thing. Belief does not need will. Belief does not need determination. It simply is. To quote Ripley, believe it or not, it simply is what it is. But faith is a much more deeper, much more complex extension of belief, if you will. And it's activated by one's understanding of outcome, of which we will speak about later. Now I want you to listen to the argument between, because I believe you're actually ready now to hear that argument between McCullough and Ellis. That would be Peter Beresford Ellis, J.A. McCullough. To summon a dead religion from its forgotten grave and to make it tell its story would require an enchanter's wand, comments J.A. McCullough in his seminal The Religion of the Ancient Celts, 1911. He explains, no Celt has left us a record of his faith and practice, and the unwritten poems of the Druids died with them. Yet, From these fragments we see the Celt as the seeker after God, linking himself by strong ties to the unseen and eager to conquer the unknown by religious rite or magic art. For the things of the spirit have never appealed in vain to the Celtic soul, and long ago classical observers were struck with the religiosity of the Celts. They neither forgot nor transgressed the law of the gods, as they thought that no good befell men apart from their will. The submission of the Celts to the Druids shows how they welcomed authority in matters of religion, and all Celtic regions have been characterized by religious devotion, easily passing over to superstition, and by loyalty to ideals and lost causes. The Celts were born dreamers, as their exquisite Elysium belief will show, and much that is spiritual and romantic in more than one European literature is due to them. Now, that's McCullough's idea of faith, and he distinguishes that faith, or if you will, that faith from, say, Druidic faith, which is more what Ellis then talks about. Hear this. This is Ellis's argument. There are several things which one can take issue with McCullough about, especially his assertion of the submission of the Celts to religious authority and the abrogation of their will to that of the deities. One has to remember that McCullough was a religious minister and speaking more of religious attitudes of his time than of those in pre-Christian or early Christian times. The very fact of the conflict between free will and predestination, encapsulated in the Pelagian-Augustan conflict, which we will come to later in this book entitled The Druids by Peter Beresford Ellis, shows that the Celts were not so inclined to abrogate their will to anyone but themselves. Now, knowing that, okay, you heard a complete different idea between what the Druids would have kind of understood and what the Celts would have understood. And we're going to talk about that now. So, what they're arguing is this idea of predestination versus free will. Now, predestination, or that original thought, would come from something more so related to Pelagianism. And free will would come from the idea of, say, more Augustinianism. Whereas this idea of Pelagianism was closer to the Druid, as the idea of Augustinianism was closer to the Celt. But regardless, I do believe that the end result would have been basically the same. Think about it. Whether we have free will or whether or not we're predestined, we're eventually going to end up in the same spot because we're all on the path. What I find, I guess, incredibly interesting, sorry about that, let me just turn off my notifications, guys. There we go. What's this got to do with faith, you would ask? And that is that to believe is to be predestined. To have faith is to allow free will. Predestined, okay, would be more about the casting of lots, whereas free will would be more saying no, if you will, to the gods. It's taking your own path, saying, no, you gave me free will, I will then use that free will to do what I wish. And so the Celts and the Druids, I believe, had just a different understanding of this concept of, if you will, faithfulness. Because the Druids would have made certain, they had to make certain that they were speaking the language of the gods. And had they not been speaking the language of the gods, and not been translating the language of the gods, then they would have never been able to do what they were able to do. And a lot of that was luck. Whereas the Celts would have been saying much of the time no to the gods until they would have said, all right, I can't do this anymore. I need something certain. I need some certainty. You know, having liberty sometimes is scary, you know? And so they would have went to the Druids to figure out what that answer was, what that outcome was. In the beginning, we talked about this idea of certainty. And if you were looking at predestination and you were looking at free will on a certain level, predestination would guarantee 100% certainty, whereas free will would guarantee 0% certainty. You would be completely uncertain in free will. You have no clue where you're going, right? You're just going. And I believe that that's the reason why the Celts would have only used the Druids in very certain circumstances, in very certain situations. And they would have only used the Druids as a last resort. That's why the Druids had so much power, because they knew that the Celts would have eventually came to them. And I think that that's something that we need to understand and believe. And most writers, I mean, if not all writers, do speak about that. You see, because Celtic free will versus Druidic determination are two very different journeys of such. Celtic free will is and Druidic determination, both are land navigation. But in the Celticism version versus the Druidism, the Druidism, in the Celticism, you're without a compass and without a watch. Whereas in Druidism, you are with a compass and with a watch. Celticism says that you are wandering, whereas Druidism says that you are postulating. Hence the casting. Hence the predicting. Hence understanding the gods and understanding time and having the intuition to know what the outcome was. As we know, the Druids were incredibly intuitive. And that's something that the Celts held in very high favor. Understanding that, I want to talk a little bit about temporal mechanics manifested in linguistics. When we talk about to believe versus to have faith, okay, to believe is something called tense, time. To have faith is something called perfect or perfection. One of the difficulties I always find in teaching language is this idea of indefinite time versus perfect time. And one of the things that's, I guess, the most interesting in this idea of time versus perfection is that time is always happening and perfection is always stopping. So that perfection draws to a close what time began, and time continues. And that at some point, perfection has to happen, and a stopping has to happen. Time, you see, is a cumulative action. When cumulative actions are still in motion within that tense. Let me give you an example. I ate. I ate is still past tense, but you're still in the past, eating. It doesn't have an ending, it doesn't have a beginning. I ate. It's still occurring in the past. In perfection, by the time of the past, present, or future, the action is complete. For example, in perfection you have, I have eaten. Now listen to it again. Time versus perfection. In time, I ate. In perfection, I have eaten. Do you feel and see the completion of the perfection and the incompletion of the tense? Just because it happened in the past doesn't mean it still isn't happening. It's still ongoing. And I think this is why the Druids were so good and well known for time traveling, for their language was not linear, their language was beyond. They spoke in a beyond sort of way to clarify the idea of tense versus perfection, and understanding that we're able to manipulate time, the reason being them known very well to be time travelers. Think of it this way, or at least another way. In tense, you say things like, I believed. That's past tense. In perfect, you would say, I have had faith. That's past perfect. Meaning, by the time the past is ended, the action is concluded. While in past tense, while the past is occurring, it's still happening in the past. And I think that that is very, very interesting in knowing this idea, because tense is very situation based, where perfect is very outcome based. And it's almost guaranteed that you know the outcome in perfection. Not imperfection, but in perfection. Whereas you don't know the outcome in tense or time, even if it is in the past, present, or future. So you would ask, well, Druid Nicholas, doesn't this go against the will of the three Norns, the will of the Fates, the will of the three witches, as in, the idea of the weaving goddesses or weaving gods? You know? Caer City, if you will. The Welsh word for the place where the castle continues to circulate and go around and around. Well, it may. It may go directly against time. You see, Time Father's children did not deal with perfection. They dealt with tense. They had to deal with tense because they know that tense was a weaving process. Perfection would have created a stop of that wheel. And so, as we go deeper and deeper into time and tense, we then begin to understand the idea of faith and belief, and the idea and strengthening now of faith and Druidic faith, and how that Druidic faith would have been enriched by the dreaming Celt. You know, Scarcity, or the realm of the dwelling deities of the weaving deities. You see, Scarcity would have been this idea of not stopping, and to stop time would have been almost anathema. Hence the reason why the Celts would have never wanted to reach the Druids, because they knew that when they went to the Druids, their idea of being dreamers would have come to an end. There would have been no dreaming after the Celts went to see the Druids, because the Druids would have said, no, we're order, we're structure, we're discipline. This is the answer. Here it is. This is what I deliver to you as a messenger of the God, as a prophet. They were, in essence, the prophets. They were not kings. In very rare instances, much later in Iron Age 2, did they then become and take roles as kings, just to uphold the order, which greatly, fell apart. But I think that once the Celt knew that they had to go to the Druid, then they were like, all right, my dreaming time is over. Just something to think about. And that brings us to the Druids and time travel. Knowing everything we learned, I write, this could be a stepping block on the ability of the Druids over time. Why? Number one, they stopped the wheel of time. They stopped the daughters of Time Father. Number two, they made things certain. We talked about that earlier. Now, let's penetrate that even further. McCullough then writes this, fires back, basically, even though one was before the other, fires back at, Ellis, saying that the Celts, unlike the Druids, were natural-born dreamers, and they had to be natural-born dreamers. Why? Why did the Celts have to be natural-born dreamers? They had to be natural-born dreamers to get and earn Tirnanog, the land of the youth. And we're going to talk about this later when I give you your homework, and we're going to talk about this later when I say that you have the idea of, in the words of the Christian, Jesus then says, you have to be like a child to earn heaven. Well, you had to be a child to get into Tirnanog, the heaven of who? The heaven of the Celts. You had to be a child. Your dreaming time would have been over. Your dreaming time would have been finished. It would have lasted. That would have been it. They had equal access, not equal outcome, the Celts, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Equal access, not equal outcome. And that would have been their dream. It would have been the Celtic dream, which is our American dream. It's the very same thing, right? The American dream is the pursuit of life, the pursuit of happiness, the role of life, and liberty, and where that places us. It's incredible, the similarities of what our forefathers of the colonies designed and almost based the American dream off of. It was all based off of the Celts. Much of it, at least. It's not to say it wasn't based off of other things, just a lot of it was. McCullough then continues to push back on Ellis, even though both of them don't exist at the same time. McCullough is much earlier than Ellis. McCullough then pushes basically Ellis off the cliff and talks about this idea of, and I said it earlier, you might have not heard it, but this idea of Elysium. And what is Elysium? Elysium. It is whiteness. Elysium is bliss. It is Gwynfit. It is heaven. It is Tirnanog. It is the dream. It is the obtaining the dream. And in order to reach this Elysium, the Celts dream of the desired outcome, where the Druids know the desired outcome. So for the Druids to reach Elysium, all they had to do was know. The Celts, on the other hand, would simply had to dream of that outcome. So what were the outcomes? Well, the outcome of belief is faith. The outcome of faith is Elysium. And what is belief? Belief is whatever you know it to be. Faith is whatever you will it to be. And Elysium is whatever you want it to be. Belief is the ovid, or the wheat. The ovid, OV is the W, creates W. It's a duonym. Faith is the Deru. Deru is also a duonym. 2 words. And the Elysium is Druid, Deruavit. And that is a tetronym, 4 words. In summary, we must stand firm in what we believe to be true, as what we believe will be our present moment because of the faith we have. Listen to that again. We must stand firm in what we believe as what we believe will be our present moment, because we're still in the past, because of the faith we have, which is in the present. You see, faith joins the past belief and the future Elysium. It is the bridge between both. It is what connects both. And in order, if you will, to create the image of the outcome and grab it, you simply then say that faith is the foundation of the Druid philosophy. It all works out. We even saw that in the roots. Bet, B-E-I-D-H. She, S-E, accented E. goal, G-O, bra, B-R-E, accented A. And finally, the conclusion. The conclusion I want you to know is this. The Druidic faith would have been defined as follows. The Druids believed that faith was the ability to ascend the mind. Remember that the mind up here, was where the soul was, right? The Druids believed that the soul was contained here. Here, the soul, what we have as soul or heart right now, right? Heart and soul, right? Would have been the liver. So that the Druids believed that faith was the ability to ascend the mind to a time in the future which becomes one's present. The foundation of this ability is one's willingness to believe in the desired outcome. You see, in the desired outcome. And that concludes tonight's talk. Your homework is this. I want you to look up Stages of Faith Development by James W. Fowler. That's Fowler. Stages of Faith Development by James W. Fowler. And where Fowler and I disagree is that when he lists these stages of faith, he puts it from a place and point of, say, childhood, that at childhood we're stuck in this stage, and then as we grow older, we're stuck in another stage, and older, stuck in another stage, and older, stuck in another stage. I don't necessarily agree with that as a Druid. I think that as a Druid, his stages, which are very well clear and laid out finally, is this. I believe that his stages, that as you are here, like firstborn, and then as you get older and older and older and older, your faith develops and develops and develops. I say that each situation contains all of his stages of faith. That it's almost like a grading process. It's almost like a process rather than a stage. And that's where I simply would clearly say that Fowler's stages of faith would not necessarily be anything Druidic. That the Druidic idea of Fowler's stages of faith would be in one circumstance, as per situation, as per predicament. Your homework is to determine both where you are on Fowler's stage and how you can see it possible on my interpretation of the Druidic levels or integrations, if you will, steps or process, if you will, of faith. You see, so many people say, I am religious. Others don't want to say the word religious. They want to say the word spiritual. And I just don't think that spiritual cuts it. It's not enough. I think that if you blend any sort of religiosity, if you will, taken from McCullough's wording, and this New Age idea of spiritual, and blend them together, then we come to this word. When someone asks you if the malignant question, the illogical question of, are you religious or are you spiritual? Don't place yourself in that box of a false dichotomy. It's an illogical question. You don't have to be either spiritual or religious. You can be both. And what is that? Simply being faithful. I am faithful. Having faith is knowing there is an outcome and understanding that is all things considered. You see, you don't have to be anything, because faithfulness is all things considered. It encompasses everything. So when you say, I am faithful, you're saying, I am all things. I am religious. I am spiritual. I am strength and courage and wisdom and vision, which is the name that that Caesar gave to the Druids. It came out, it turned into the word Druid. So I hope you learned something tonight. I hope that you understand the beautifulness and the blissfulness and the teaching of the Druids tonight to you. For that is what they wished you would see. And know that their will is the will of the God or gods of your understanding. Be good. Be God. Be all things considered. The highest level of achievement is to be faithful. Whatever time of day it is, make it great, keep it great, and know that you are so special, so important to the deity or deities, pantheon or pantheon of your understanding. Petshegobra, the 4 simple principle words of the Druidic philosophy. It all works out. We learned that tonight. We saw that tonight. We proved that tonight. Arenit. Est le mogui. Toshefir. Toshefir.